Hello, it's Mr. Cherrick again. Now I'm going to walk you through the grid drawings for the portrait unit here. Each of these three choices involves using a grid to sort of help you draw your subject on your paper. And each project sort of is a variation on how a grid could be used. And they're all pretty advanced. So unlike the drawings you've done in the past using a grid, these are going to push you a little bit further in a little bit different directions. Your first choice here is a grid value study. So for this one, each of your grid squares on your reference, you're sort of going to just draw the value, or you're going to condense the information inside that grid down to some other component, whether it's a shape or maybe just a couple of marks. There's a billion different ways to interpret this, but essentially what you're going to use is the grid as sort of an organization tool for your value instead of drawing the form. And so the grid for this is going to be a lot finer. You're going to want to use way more grid squares than you normally use. Instead of making a 1-inch grid, you're going to have to make your own grid, and you're going to have to make it a bit finer, maybe 1/2 inch or 1/4 inch grid, which is going to give you a lot more squares and a little bit more particulate kind of information. I have the supplies for the grid. Ask me for those supplies. And then for your paper, you're going to use a full sheet of paper. You can use pretty much any photographic reference you want, but I would highly recommend that you create your own reference by photographing someone you know or yourself. And yeah, let's get into some examples. The sort of progenesis for this idea starts with Chuck Close, and he did a lot of value grid drawings. Here's this more abstract style. You can use these approaches where he sort of creates these little blob shapes of different kinds of gray. He's using paint in this example, and you could do this with drawing media if you wanted to, or you could supplement drawing media with a little bit of paint here and there. I'm kind of open to anything, so make sure you run it past me before you start painting, or if you want to use a more abstract style like this. Here he's using fingerprints, and again, you've probably done this before, some of you. But if you want to try fingerprints with ink or fingerprints with drawing media, or just a much simpler mark making method, like maybe you want to use vine and use layers of vine, or some kind of smudging technique where you use your blending stump instead of the actual charcoal or pencil, that's fine too. But again, he's still using a grid, he's still using a very methodical method to build up his drawing. Here's a student example next to an actual Chuck Close example here. And again, the student example sort of shows the process by which you're going to do this. Notice the grid is very fine. There's a lot of squares. It's probably a 1/4 inch grid made by hand. And then on the paper, each square is an individual value. So that's kind of what you're doing here. Here's some more student examples. Some of these, I believe, are done in paint. Some of them are done with drawing media. You can't quite tell because these drawings are quite large. So when you zoom far out, you really can't tell what kind of media is being used. And again, if you want to use different media, if like you want to use white and black charcoal together, if you want to use just graphite, if you want to use graphite with a bit of watercolor or some paint, you can cross combine media. The whole goal is to get a really fine grid drawing with just values. Here's some more student examples. These kind of break the rules of sort of like how to represent the values. Some of these have a very high contrast in them. The one in the upper left, for instance, has a very high contrast in it, and the one on the far right uses a very unconventional grid. Now you can do that for this project if you want, but doing the math for that's a little bit harder. And this student didn't really adhere to the grid very tightly. So if you want to break away from that grid and what values you see, you can kind of play fast and loose with the value. If you're going to do that, try to run past your idea past me. Try to show me what you're going to do, or explain to me what you're going to try. And we'll talk out some of the details there if you want to try something experimental like this. But now's your chance to sort of break free of that and try something like that. Your second choice is a large-scale portrait. This pretty much speaks for itself. We're going to take a look at some artist examples here of how to do a large-scale portrait. And what large-scale means is over at least 2 to 3 feet. So your sheet of paper has to be at least 3 feet by 4 feet. Now I have sheets of paper that are white that are that big. If you'd like to use another color of paper, we have large sheets of gray paper and brown paper that you can use. You'll use a grid for this, of course, and the grid will help you draw your subject realistically at a large scale. It doesn't matter what size the grid is. When you draw your grid squares on your paper, so long as they're larger and stay in proportion to a 1 by 1 square, you can pretty much draw your reference as large as you want. The goal here, again, will be to make a natural representation of your subject at this large scale. There's a lot of little kinks and idiosyncrasies you're going to have to work through for this project. Here's some examples of Chuck Close's work again. His paintings that he did in a photorealistic style in the 60s are absolutely massive. These paintings are at least, I want to say, like 8 feet by 10 feet tall. If you've ever seen one in a museum, they're rather imposing, rather impressive. And you can see the brushstrokes, but it still looks almost 100% photorealistic. And that can be one of your goals for this project. Some more examples of Chuck Close work. The reason I showed these in particular is because the one on the right is in Milwaukee, and I've actually seen that painting several times. I'm pretty familiar with it. It's very impressive, very unsettling. But again, another goal for yourself can be that large scale and that high resolution, that high detail level. Another goal for you, if you want, can be a more abstract representation of the subject. And again, it's a possibility with this particular project. If you want to do a non-representational, larger grid portrait, you can kind of play fast and loose with those rules. But again, have a plan in mind if you're going to try this. Another artist we'll look at here real quick is Kara Walker. She's really famous for her silhouette drawings that are large scale. She does silhouette cutouts like the ones in the background. That's her standing in the middle. Here's some large-scale installations of her silhouette cutouts. Without going into too much detail, a lot of her work deals with slavery and violence and just all the history behind that. I could talk about it for hours, but I'm going to let somebody who's much smarter do that for you. If you're really curious about her work, it's worth looking into. Some more examples. I isolate these in particular because if you remember the previous pictures, these are life-size. So, you know, dealing with that kind of scale is something she does quite often and does rather well. Some more examples. Now we're gonna just look at some of her drawings. Her drawings that she does are also life scale, and they deal with the sort of same subject matter. But if you've ever seen these drawings before, these are massive drawings, like at least 5 feet by 10 feet, just almost completely to scale. Very, very large. Very well done. She's a bit more expressive with her style, but it's something to look towards for that sort of accuracy and dynamism in the way she poses her subjects, her figures. Some more examples. More examples of her work. This small installation was done in Chicago. I had a chance to see this. It was very well done, very, very interesting. Just the quality of her line work and all the other details she adds to everything she makes in these installations. Like the cut paper is just so well done, and all the smaller drawings and advertisements she makes are just excellent. So everybody should try to challenge themselves to draw at this scale at some point in their lives. This is kind of why I include this project. And so here's some photos just of some students working at this large scale. So things you're going to have to sort of work around is the amount of space you need. You might want to work on like a wall, or you might want to work on an easel for one of these drawings. We have rather large sheets of just wood that you can use if you want. We also have some easels if you want to work on an easel, or you could work on the side of a cupboard. It doesn't really matter where you work, so long as you get this chance to work at a large scale. Here's some student examples. Again, most of these drawings 3 feet, 5 feet or so. You can achieve quite a bit of detail. The great thing about detail at a large scale is you can make mistakes, and because it's so large, nobody will notice them. When you work at a small scale, a small mistake is very, very visible. Here, not so much. The thing you want to get right out of the gate, though, is your proportions. The proportions of these drawings are very well done, but again, they're using the grid, so make sure you get your basic outline down first and get that down right, and make sure you check between your reference and your drawing multiple times with me, with a friend, just to make sure it looks right before you start rendering things. And you have a lot of freedom with this, so if you want to be a bit loose, you can be. If you want to be, use like other colors, you can use other colors. There's a lot of freedom with this. Talk to me if you have an idea for something that's a bit unusual or a bit different than the norm, if you want help doing that. Your last choice is by far the hardest one. And this I would love to see someone try. By hard, what I mean is that there's a bit more thinking involved in the transition between what you do with your grid and what you do on the paper. So for this one, you're going to distort your grid, and the way you distort it is completely up to you. So you can use a ruler, and you can sort of use diagonal lines that are kind of random. You can use curvy lines. Doesn't matter. How you distort it is totally up to you. The sky is the limit. When you distort it on your paper, though, and you draw it on your actual, picture, your drawing, that jump in logic between what you see and kind of what you're putting on your paper is where you get these really, really weird results. And how you do that is like totally up to you. The reason you would distort the grid before you put it on your paper is to sort of make your brain jump through those loops. You have to draw what you see in each grid square, but because the squares are distorted on your paper, it just sort of does some really weird things to your drawing. So just to walk you through this first, the way it works is you will draw a normal grid on your paper, or your reference. On your reference, you can draw just a plain old 1-inch grid. And then on your paper, what you're going to do is you're going to draw the grid in a sort of distorted fashion. And in each square, you should probably assign a letter and a number, and then draw each square warped based on what you see on your reference. So if none of this makes sense, call me over if you want to do this project, and I'll walk you through kind of a quick demonstration of how to do it. Because it's really not as hard as I make it out to be, but it is a bit more work in your head to sort of figure out. So again, here's an example. This is a great example of kind of what you can do. Again, on your reference, if you see the lower right hand, those two grids there, that's kind of showing you the process. If you look at your reference, that would be the one on the left with the black squares kind of diagonally going through. Each grid square has a number and a letter, and then on the right is the actual drawing. And for the drawing, what the artist did was they made the lines all diagonal and wibbly wobbly. But each square, since it has a letter and a number, 1A, the way you would draw it is kind of draw it like out into that corner. And then 2B, you would draw it really, really skinny and thin. Okay, so you would stretch that section out quite a way. There's a completed drawing in the upper left-hand corner, way in the left there, of this sort of style, and that's just one way to do it. There's a bunch of different ways to distort your grid. Again, you don't have to use straight lines. You can use any kind of line to distort your grid. Here's some more student examples. This student sort of used a fisheye lens kind of effect where they bowed out the middle. Same principle, except now they're distorting kind of the center of the drawing. Some more examples. Some really crazy ones, by the way. The artist on the right really stretched out his grid squares and made them really, really compact. The artist on the left really, really, really stretched the top and the bottom. So horizontally, it's very stretched. Vertically, it's very stretched. I include these examples here just for examples of what you could do with curves and like kind of fisheye effects. How you distort your grid is totally up to you. This project has a lot of freedom, and the results can be really, really crazy. Just go nuts with it, have fun with it. And those are the 3 grid drawing projects. If you're having trouble with any part of these projects or your grid, let me know and I can kind of walk you through how to use a grid.